Welcome to episode 220 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing screenwriter Alston Ramsay and his director brother Julius Ramsay. So stay tuned for that interview. They just did a cool high concept thriller called Midnighters, and we talked through the process of how they got that film produced. A quick bit of follow-up. I just want to mention that Stephen Coogan, who recently wrote, produced, and directed and acted in a film called Dance Baby Dance, he wrote a book about his entire process of writing, directing, producing this film. I will link to it in the show notes. You can buy it over on Amazon.com. And I interviewed Stephen on episode 214. So if you want to get a little context and a little backstory about this film, definitely go check that out. Stephen was very generous with his time, came on, gave a lot of real inside information on how he got that film produced. So I think it's an interesting episode. And now with the addition of this book, it can really give you some good insight into this entire filmmaking process. Once again, I'll link to it in the show notes if you have any interest in checking that out. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mentioned in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast, and then just look for episode number 220. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. I'll teach you how to write a professional logline inquiry letter and how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I am interviewing writer and director brothers Julius and Alston Ramsay. Here is the interview. Welcome, Julius and Alston, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you guys coming on the show with me today.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
So to start out, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up and how did you get interested in the entertainment industry? And why don't, Julius, why don't you start first and then we'll go to Alston?
Sure. We grew up in North Carolina, and I was always interested in film and television since I was a young child. And I discovered filmmaking when I was in college and realized that was the career that I wanted to go into, and I wanted to be a director. And so after college, I moved out to Los Angeles, and I wound up getting work originally as an editor because I'd read a lot of biographies about directors that started out as editors, and I started working in the venue that I could get my foot in the door, which was reality television and documentary TV shows, and worked in that for about 5 years before switching over into scripted, and worked on shows like Alias, Battlestar Galactica, Flash Forward, and The Walking Dead. And The Walking Dead is where I began to direct professionally for television.
Okay, perfect. And maybe you can just tell us quickly, how did you get that first job as an editor? And did you have like a skill set, editing skill set that you got from college or that you got from doing shorts? Or how did you even get that experience enough that you felt qualified to start applying to these jobs as an editor?
Yeah, I mean, to be perfectly honest, I really fibbed my way into my first job. I kind of exaggerated the amount of experience I had, and I was hired for a night job, and I bought a book about how to run Avids. I had worked on them a little bit in college, but not very much because the technology was still early. Mm-hmm. And I managed to kind of, as they say, fake it till you make it. I managed to sort of skate by for a couple months and taught myself, everything that I needed to know about the technical side of editing. And by the time they sort of realized what was going on, I was good enough and I was invaluable enough to the show that, they really wanted me, and I was a big part of their team. So, I mean, my advice would be get your foot in the door no matter what you have to do to get there.
Yeah. So, Alston, maybe you can give us
no rules.
Yeah. So also maybe you can give us kind of the same overview of your trajectory and how you ultimately ended up writing this script.
Sure. Well, given that Jude and I are brothers, I also grew up in a small town in North Carolina and was exposed at a pretty early age to films, and particularly horror and thrillers, because Jude would be renting about every horror there was at the video store, and I would be the kid brother watching stuff that I really probably should not have been watching at that age. And so, as I went through college, I gravitated toward writing in a journalistic sense for one of the newspapers, and then I was a magazine editor right after college. And then I was a speechwriter in Washington, D.C. at the Pentagon for 4 years, and in Afghanistan for a year. And while I was doing that, I was speechwriting, so still in the writing world, but also, as a hobby, I was reading screenplays. I read books about screenplays. I took Robert McKee's screenwriting seminar, which I think everyone in Hollywood has probably taken at one point or another, to include Jude. He actually is probably the one that pointed me toward it in the first place. And so after business school, I was trying to decide what direction to go, and I decided I was going to move here to pursue screenwriting full time, because it was just one of those things that had been sort of the itch at the back of my mind, where the timing was right, that I kind of realized if I didn't give it a try, I was going to regret it for the rest of my life and always wonder if that was something I could have done. And so, yeah, I moved here, and it helped to have Jude already here, already established. And, we went to work on the screenplay for this movie.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, let's dig into to Midnighters. Maybe to start out, you can give us, and maybe this is Alston, maybe this is a question for you, but I suppose Julius could probably answer it too. Maybe you can just give us a quick logline or pitch for the film.
Jude's better at the pitches. I'm going to let him do that one.
All right, let's hear it.
Sure. The film takes place on New Year's Eve. It's about a not-so-happily married couple driving home from a New Year's Eve party. They get into a car accident and hit and kill a man in the road, only to discover that the man was carrying a gun and a piece of paper with their home address written on it.
Wow.
Shenanigans ensue.
Yeah. So where did this idea come from? What was sort of the genesis of the idea?
Sure. So when I first moved here, we had the idea that we wanted to make a film, and we had certain parameters. As a lot of these types of movies, we wanted to be primarily in one location, a limited cast. And Jude and I, our sensibilities, and we can discuss that later. We kind of wanted to do something that was grounded in reality and was more of a psychological thriller, a psychological horror that wasn't focused on ghosts or slashers or anything like that. So we came up with a list of ideas, and one of them was kind of inspired by this really twisted true story of a nurse driving home one night who had hit a homeless guy, and he went halfway through a windshield. She goes home, and the guy's still alive, stuck in the windshield, and he begs for help but bleeds out over the course of 24, 48 hours. And I mentioned that idea, and the article was years old, and it just always stuck in my head. And strangely enough, Jude had read the same article and had also remembered it. And I think that was very much like a rough starting point for a story, and a lot of that was also in the idea of people can be regular people can find themselves in circumstances where they do things that are extraordinarily awful to a point that's, shocking in some respects. So that was really the genesis of the idea. And then, it went through many, many iterations from there, and involved a lot of direction from Jude on, his vision for how he saw the film.
So it sounds like your intention from the start, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, was to write this and then Julius would direct it and you guys would produce it together. It was not something that you were looking to necessarily sell to a production company. Is that correct?
That's correct. That it was a joint project. That it was always going to be, something that I wrote that he was going to direct. Our original goal, we went into it. I don't think we were intending to produce it ourselves. We just got to a certain point. I think this is the reality with a lot of independent films and a lot of first-time features, is that it was not something that felt like it would happen on a timeline that we liked unless we sort of did it ourselves. And, I have a background. I went to business school, so I had a background with startup fundraising and angel fundraising, which, piecing together the financing for a small independent film is very similar to that. So, we learned a lot by going through the process of meeting with production companies who do these kind of films and wrapping our minds around the budgets for them and sort of figuring out how do you make a film feel bigger than it might actually be on sort of the budget sheet.
Yeah. So let's dig into your writing process a little bit. Maybe you can just tell us, how much time did you spend sort of mulling things over, doing the outline, versus how much time were you actually in final draft writing the script?
A lot more time mulling. A whole lot more time mulling.
Mm-hmm.
With this one, Jude and I had worked out the big beats together, and then, part of the outline together, and then I had outlined it more. And my normal process, which outside of that sort of the initial part, the normal process is I think about things and it's in my head for a while, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. And when I start to sit down to really put it all on note cards, at that point I already feel like I know the major beats of the story, like in my head. I know the characters. And so then I map it out on sort of the old note card method, the save the cat method, which, it works to some extent. You have to improvise a bit. And then, that's a month-long process. The actual writing, I don't know if it's healthy or not, but every one of the screenplays I've written, it's kind of been a 10-day to 2-week just crushing 12 hours a day, not really sleeping, and powering through the first draft. And then, with this film, after the first draft, it went through a lot of revisions to, that was more of, I think, a blueprint and a framework. And then, Jude had a lot of ideas on the characters and the tone and all of the things that are really in the bucket of a director. And that led to a number of rewrites there. And then there was another rewriting process once we were actually in Rhode Island where we filmed and we had our actors there. And when you started to see the way that they were performing and what they were doing with the characters, we leveraged that. And because we shot the film mostly in order, we were able to see that early on and sort of adjust the characters and the arc later in the script or later in the actual shoot.
Yeah. So, Joyce, maybe this is a good question for you. What were some of the things that you maybe didn't like about the first draft, and maybe sort of the notes that you gave them? And we could talk sort of specifically about that, but I think it'll be interesting for screenwriters to hear kind of the director's perspective on, what things maybe weren't working for you in this story, and ultimately how did you guys change those?
Well, it was all a collaborative process, so it wasn't so much that I didn't like something and made him do it, or he wanted to do something and I didn't want to do it. It was usually we got pretty quickly on the same page. I would say the biggest change from the original draft of the screenplay, which was a note kind of given to us by somebody else that had read the script, but that I agreed with, and then Alston agreed with too, is that we had a different ending. We had a different character than the character that kind of wins out in the end. We had a different character win out and survive, and it sort of, we wound up, I think the original draft of the screenplay, it didn't have as much there being like one specific clear protagonist for the film. It was a little more ambiguous, and not that it's like super defined that there's a clear protagonist, but I think now there is, and that was a big change. And when we kind of made that shift, we wound up as a result changing the ending of the film to have a different character win out.
Okay, yeah, no, I think that's a great example. So you guys mentioned at the top of the interview sort of your sensibilities. You wanted to do a contained thriller, not something that was necessarily magical or supernatural. And I'm curious, what went into that thought process? Had you guys talked to some distributors and they said, this is the kind of movie we're looking for? Was this just purely artistic? This is just the movie we want to make? What went into your thought process about sort of deciding that you didn't want to make a supernatural horror versus what you ended up making?
That was really our own preference. I mean, I guess personally, I think we feel that the market, is oversaturated with, films that are so heavily reliant upon gimmicks. We wanted to, make a film that was much more rooted in like character drama and didn't, rely on that other stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with that other stuff, and there's such great material out there, and I've worked on some wonderful shows that deal, with supernatural and science fiction, but just to make our first film, we wanted to do something that was more grounded and that had a more, realistic sensibility to it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, and I think some of the films we were looking at, whether it's the Hitchcock canon or Danny Boyle's Shallow Grave, or the Coen brothers too, a number of their films, they're just in that category, and there's a real challenge with the element of psychological horror. It's more difficult, I think, in some respects, and I think that was a challenge as filmmakers that we wanted to take on.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious too, and I get a lot of the people who listen to this podcast have writing partners. You guys are in a slightly different situation, that Julius is the director, Alston's the writer, and you guys are also brothers, so obviously you've known each other your whole life. But I'm curious if there ever are any moments where you just don't agree, and ultimately, how do you kind of get over those hurdles?
Sure.
There are definitely moments when we don't agree. I feel like the arguments we had through this process, a lot of them have been on the business front. On the creative front, it's hard for me to think of there's definitely not any major disagreements. And I think maybe that's because from a creative standpoint, we come from the same place, and, I think we were sort of raised on the same movies, and the reason for that in my case is because Jude rented movies from the Video Spectrum. That was our local joint, and I watched them because I was too young to drive to rent movies myself or anything. So I think we have like a lot of shared creativity there.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of these. I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
I was just going to ask if Jude had anything to add on that front.
No, I totally agree.
Okay, so let's talk about, you mentioned that when you had the script finished, you started to have some meetings with companies. Maybe you can just tell us how you were able to get these meetings. What did that look like? Was it a cold phone call? Was it someone in your network from working in the industry? What did that actually look like in terms of just getting those initial meetings with companies, which it sounds like they didn't necessarily pan out, but I'm sure those meetings at least were valuable in some ways, and I know there'll be people wondering how you got those.
Sure. They were primarily through my contacts in the entertainment industry. I mean, I have, representation, and I had managers, and I knew various producers and whatnot. So I would say, they all kind of came through. I mean, I've worked in the business for 17 years, so I had, I knew quite a few people that we were able to get in and meet with.
Yeah. So let's talk about raising money. Maybe we can just kind of go through, at least in broad strokes, how you guys were able to raise money and hopefully give some tips and tricks to people that want to take this path themselves.
Sure. So in business school, I focused on entrepreneurship, and then immediately afterwards was involved in a startup that was doing an angel fundraising round. And for people that sort of aren't in the business and startup world, an angel round is your earliest round of funding that's really seed money to kind of get off the ground before you get into any of the sort of like venture capital and big money. And, that is almost always going to be friends and friends of friends and friends of friends of friends. And so I put together a financial presentation that was, very, very much based on sort of the business school style of fundraising for small businesses. I think the reality is the MBA may have actually harmed me in some respects, that the kind of people that finance a movie or are going to give money for a startup, they're generally the kind of people that, yes, they want to see like numbers and spreadsheets, but they also know it's a high risk investment, particularly when it comes to film. They're savvy enough investors to know that there is a good chance you're going to lose your money because statistically that's the nature of independent film. So we really did it in the normal way that you do startups or independent film, where it's friends of friends of friends of friends, and lots of cold calls and lots of rejections, and taking any amount of money because you can eventually piece it together to reach a budget for which you can make it a film. And at the same time, another thing we did is we got our hands on other budgets for low budget films, and we really started to understand, okay, what is money getting spent on, and where can we save money? What are we willing to take risk on, and where do we want to have a fuller budget to sort of execute the vision? And so on one hand, we're raising money and bringing that number up. On the other hand, we're taking a budget and we're cutting things and bringing that number down until they, eventually meet in the middle, where you're like, well, we've got enough money to go out and make this. And then that also gets into production decisions on, we filmed in Rhode Island because they have a good tax incentive, but also because a state like that, everything's a bit cheaper, from your catering to your location to your actual day rates. You can make less money go a lot farther in the filmmaking world.
And what did your pitch look like to these people? And it sounds like there's a lot of folks who are friends of friends, so they're not people you necessarily know. Maybe you can just kind of go over, again, maybe just in broad strokes, what your pitch looked like, again, just to help other people who potentially want to try and do this as well.
Sure. I mean, it was a PowerPoint deck. The whole thing, I don't know, was it 15 or 20 slides, maybe with 5 or 10 backup. And you have the creative side, which are, here's the story, here's the team. And in terms of the team, it helped a lot that, Jute has been in the industry and has credits on a number of big shows. We didn't have cast attached to that point. Certainly, if you had any cast members attached, you would want them in the deck. And then, we had some other smaller films that had done well to sort of show comparables. We had some estimates for potential revenue based on, research on the internet. You can find figures if you look hard enough, and you can estimate on a lot of things. And so we had some spreadsheets that kind of ran out what the figures might look like over the next several years through the different revenue streams, whether that's, video on demand or theatrical or streaming. It's a fast changing world, but those numbers are out there or close enough if you dig deep. So, there's the financial component, the creative component. And then I think the team was the most important thing. And that's the same with startups as well, is that people that are going to invest in something like this, they are going to invest in the people more so than anything else, because, as I said, they know it's high risk. They know that the payoff might be a whole lot. It might not be much. It's hard to tell. But if you have a really strong team, and whether that's the producers, the writers, the directors, or actors. You want to highlight that as much as possible.
Yeah, and I'm curious, ultimately giving those sort of financial models like, oh, well, this independent film made this much money. Like I've seen a lot of these decks over the years, and as being someone in the industry, I frankly roll my eyes when because people always cherry pick, the indie films that made $100 million. They were made for, $1 million, made $100 million. And so I always just think, that's a little bit strange. Do you think that actually affected these? What I've always found with people that invest in low budget indie films is there's a lot of other things they're interested in besides just pure ROI, whether that be getting a small role in the film or whether that be just being involved, going to the premiere, being involved in something that's cool. Ultimately, what do you think it was that got people to invest in this? Obviously, the team is important, but are there any other things?
For us, I think that was the primary thing. I think you're absolutely right about cherry picking your, call it your paranormal activity. The highest ROI, I think, of any film in the history of the movie business. One of the things we focused on were not necessarily those massive blockbusters that came from low budgets like a Blair Witch Project or something, but we focused on just through a lot of meetings and just people we knew. If you have films made for sensible budgets, the returns look different because, you don't need Blair Witch to make back your money. So the economics, if you get the budget down to the right point, do look different. And so I agree you don't want to cherry pick, but I think there is an expectation that even if people know that, hey, this could go many different directions, they still want to see that you've at least thought through the finances, that you've thought through the worst case scenario, the middle scenario, and the best case scenario. And I would not advise to highlight those smashing blockbusters too much because, as you say, people roll their eyes at that because they know. But picking some other films that people haven't necessarily heard of that did well financially, that's a little bit more in the ballpark, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how can people see Midnighters? Do you know what
we also sent this. We also had the script. So we also had the script that we sent people, and there are people that haven't read scripts before, but people that are invested in this movie, they can read. Mm-hmm. They can read a script. They can enjoy it, and I think that's an important part of it. And I think there's also the issue of transparency just in all fronts and throughout the whole process. We've sent them updates every few months on every step of the process. And I think, as you said, there's a lot of things that people are interested in beyond the pure finances. And I think the feedback I've gotten from people that did invest is that, they really enjoyed detailed updates that might be on like really esoteric topics because it's fascinating to hear how does the editing process of a film work? How does the scoring process of a film work? And then, everyone got to come out for the premiere at the Los Angeles Film Festival, which was at, the ArcLight in Culver City. So it was seeing a movie that people invested in on a 300-person theater on a screen at an ArcLight, pretty cool experience for everyone involved.
Yeah, for sure. So how can people see Midnighters? Do you know what the release schedule is going to be?
Sure, it's coming out on March 2nd. It's going to be released in 7 theaters initially nationwide, like New York, LA, Atlanta, Denver, Philadelphia, and I think like Kansas City maybe. But it's also going to be released simultaneously on pay-per-view and video on demand.
Okay.
And iTunes, I think.
Yep.
There's a whole bunch of different ways. The best thing to do is to go to the IFC Midnight homepage, or they can check out our website, midnightersfilm.com, and that's got we'll have all the information.
Okay, perfect. I will get those. I'll get the Midnighters website, and I'll put that in the show notes. Are there any other, whether it be social media channels or anything you're comfortable sharing that people can just follow to keep up with what you're doing? Twitter, Facebook, blog, anything that you might want people to know about? You can mention those now and again.
Sure.
Grab them.
Sure. We have a Midnighters Film Instagram and a Midnighters Film Twitter. So if you just go to Midnighters Film on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, all three of those are active and are going to contain information about the movie.
Okay, perfect. I'll get those and I'll put those
and
in.
they're constantly being updated with some behind-the-scenes stuff.
Okay, nice. Yeah, so I'll get that and put it in
awesome.
the show notes. So thank you guys. Good luck with this film, and I really appreciate you guys coming on and talking with me today.
Okay, thank you so much.
It was our pleasure. We enjoyed it.
Thank you. We'll talk to you guys later. A quick plug for the SYS Screenwriting Analysis Service. It's a really economical way to get high-quality professional evaluation on your screenplay. When you buy our 3-pack, you get evaluations at just $67 per screenplay for feature films and just $55 for teleplays. All the readers have professional experience reading for studios, production companies, contests, and agencies. You can read a short bio on each reader on our website, and you can pick the reader who you think is the best fit for your script. Turnaround time is usually just a few days, but rarely more than a week. The readers will evaluate your script on 6 key factors: concept, character, structure, marketability, tone, and overall craft, which includes formatting, spelling, and grammar. Every script will get a grade of pass, consider, or recommend, which should help you roughly understand where your script might rank if you were to submit it to a production company or agency. We can provide an analysis on features or television scripts. We also do proofreading without any analysis. We will also look at a treatment or outline and give you the same analysis on it. So if you're looking to vet some of your project ideas, this is a great way to do it. We will also write a logline and synopsis for you. You can add this logline synopsis service to an analysis, or you can simply purchase this service as a standalone product. As a bonus, if your screenplay gets a recommend or consider from one of our readers, you get to list the screenplay in the SYS Select database, which is a database for producers to find screenplays and a big part of our SYS Select program. This is a new service, but we've already got producers in the system looking for screenplays. As a further bonus, if your script gets a recommend from one of our readers, your screenplay will get included in our monthly Best Of newsletter. Each month we send out a newsletter that highlights the best screenplays that have come through our script analysis service. This monthly newsletter goes out to our list of over 400 producers who are actively looking for material. So this is another great way to get your material out there. So if you want a professional evaluation of your screenplay at a very reasonable price, check out sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. On the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing Gordy Hoffman. He is a screenwriter, and he also runs the Blue Cat Screenwriting Competition. He did a short film called Dog Bowl, which is now available on Amazon Prime. If you have a minute, definitely check that out. That will give you a lot of context to the interview next week as we talk about a lot of the story, writing the script, some of the story decisions that he made, and then, of course, also just the making of that short film. So I will link to it in the show notes, but if you have a minute, I think it's about 25-minute short film. And again, if you're already signed up for Amazon Prime, there's no additional cost. You can just go there and watch it. So definitely check that out if you have a minute, as the interview, I think, will make a lot more sense if you've actually seen the film. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. So to wrap things up this week, I want to do something a little bit differently than I normally do at the end of the episodes. This past week, I saw an article, and I'm going to talk about that. This article, it's an article from a blog, and I will link to it in the show notes. But the article was called, and the title of the blog article really sums up the whole thing, but I'll get into some of the details. But the blog article was called Stop Trying to Be Original and Be Prolific Instead. It's on a site called Prolifico. Again, I'll link to it in the show notes. The title sort of sums it up, but there's a quick summary at the end of the article that I want to mention. It goes something like this: never equate being highly prolific with a low level of creative quality. Some of the world's greatest artists, writers, and thinkers are hugely productive people. Creators are notoriously bad at knowing when their work has merit or not merit. So don't sweat about how good your work is. Just show it to your audience and they will tell you. Stop obsessing. Don't endlessly pick over the bones of your idea. If you do, you're in danger of experiencing perfection paralysis. But while you shouldn't overanalyze, you should always do the best possible work you can do. Don't put half-baked, flabby ideas out there unless you're happy with just your mom's opinion, which of course is going to be thumbs up. Remember, the first ideas are always the most conventional. To get to the really original and radical stuff, keep digging and keep producing. And that's part of the process, is just producing a lot of material is going to get you down to that point where you're producing probably your best material. As I said, sometimes this seems counterintuitive, whereas, producing less means you'll produce higher quality. And I don't think with creative pursuits that that's actually true. There's a bunch of pieces to this, so I just want to dissect those a little bit. Again, first, I think the big misconception that if you produce a lot, then the quality will automatically suffer. Again, no one is saying push out a bunch of half-baked stuff. You want to make sure that your stuff is as good as you can make it. But with every project you do, again, that's going to make you a little bit better, a little bit sharper, and it's going to get a little bit deeper into kind of what you're trying to do. Just don't endlessly obsess over trying to write the perfect screenplay. You're much better off getting that screenplay to a point where it's as good as you feel like you can make it, being honest with yourself, and then moving on to another screenplay. It's much better to have 3, 4, 5 slightly imperfect screenplays than spending all your time trying to produce this one perfect screenplay. Because the fact of the matter is you're never going to have that perfect screenplay. It's never going to be perfect. And I want to give kind of a practical example of this. A few years ago, and I had the podcast on there, so if you go back and listen, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, at one point a producer hired me to write a script. He had kind of an idea, and when I say an idea, he had maybe about a half page of sort of a summary of an idea. And he needed the full feature-length script, so 90-page script written within 6 days. And, so I bashed this script out literally from starting with his one paragraph, turning it into a fully fleshed out screenplay in 6 days, produced it to him, wrote the script, gave it to him, and he was pretty happy with it. But the big thing that was interesting to me was I took this script into my writers group, and every time I've ever presented something in the writers group, I've always spent a lot more than 6 days on it. And I was amazed at the reaction I got from this material. A lot of people really liked it, and the reaction I got was generally very positive. And I would say it was much more positive than much of the material that I've spent, many, many months laboring over. And this was a real insight, again, really going sort of to the heart of that idea that, lots of quantity doesn't necessarily detract from quality. I've brought in tons of scripts there that have gone over like a lead balloon, and some of those scripts I have really thought I thought they were good. I thought people were going to like them. You go in there, and again, it goes to this other idea that creatives are not always that great at assessing their own work and understanding the viability of it. So creating something, making it as good as you can, not endlessly overwriting it and then getting it out to your audience. I mean, if you're a screenwriter, that audience is going to be the producers, an agent, the managers, maybe script contests, maybe submitting it through services like my own Selling Your Screenplay services. That's your audience. That's getting it out there. I'm always surprised too, and again, this is kind of just another example. I'm always surprised too by when a producer reads one of my scripts and really likes it. Over the years, I've often tried to put them onto another script. Like I'll say, yeah, I have the one that you really like, but I also have this other one. And there's a bunch of reasons for this. Sometimes it's a budgetary thing where the producer really likes a script, but he doesn't think he can raise that much money, so I push him another script. But I've always been amazed that once a producer kind of hooks into one of my scripts, it's very rare that I'm able to get them to flip to another script and be just as passionate about another one of my scripts. And again, it's like from where I sit, some of my scripts maybe I think are better than others, but where these producers and stuff, they'll read one of my scripts that maybe I don't think is my greatest script, and they would just love it for whatever reason, and then I'll give them one that I think is a superior script, and they'll be like, no, I don't like that one. So again, it's very tough for artists to assess their own material. Really keep that in mind as you are producing and writing your own stuff. Think about, too, some of the most successful filmmakers of our time. Woody Allen, Steven Spielberg are two names that come to mind. These guys have produced a ton of content over the years. They're always working on new stuff. They're always putting out new films. They're relentless in their sort of constant pursuit to get new stuff out into the world. And every film they do, it's not necessarily a big hit or a home run. I mean, they have some duds on their resume, too. And again, I think that really goes to this idea of just don't be a perfectionist. Keep pushing stuff out there. That's that's what's going to ultimately get you to your best work. The ability to constantly push stuff out there is a big part of the screenwriting equation. And the good news, and I think to me this is sort of what's hopeful about reading an article like this, the good news is that at least to some degree, we have the ability to control this. We can all just be more disciplined and work harder and produce more stuff. And even more good news is that, the vast majority of the people who want to be writers who are out there, they aren't willing to be super disciplined and super persistent. I can't tell you over the years how many, people that really want to be screenwriters, they've written one script and they think that's enough, to launch a professional career. And, maybe you can find some examples out there that was enough, where someone wrote a great first spec script, it got them an agent, that agent got them work, and their careers were off and running. But I would say that's the exception, not the rule. And so again, if you're willing to take that extra step and grind through, 1, 2, 3, 4, a dozen, 2 dozen scripts, you give yourself a leg up. And again, we're in control of that. At least to some degree, our work ethic and our persistence is stuff that we can control. And if you're willing to do that work, you are in a good position. You have a leg up on the other people, most of who will not be willing to do that work. My big takeaway from this article is the simple question: how am I going to be able to produce the best work of my career? And anyone at any level should be thinking about this. As artists, we all want to produce our best work. There's always those sort of periods in an artist's career, looking back, Picasso, Shakespeare, whoever the great artist was, where sort of there's this period where they produce their best work, their most prolific period. And often if you look at that period, again, it comes with not just quality, but it also comes with quantity. It's just such an important point. So on a practical level, how do we do that? For me, again, I just need to push myself harder. I need to be more prolific. I mentioned this last week. I finished my most recent writing assignment on the kids' TV show, but I'm going to continue to write. I'm just going to keep writing some spec scripts. In my case, for right now, I think that means some short scripts I'm going to pump out. But anyway, the main thing is just, keep writing stuff. Whatever you're working on, increase that output just a little bit. Be a little more productive. And as the pinch winds down, again, just pushing this back on me, as I wind down with the pinch, I'm still working on the poster. I'm still polishing up the trailer, getting some of those things in line. And then I'm going to have sort of a marketing blitz. I'm going to go out to other podcasts. I'm going to try and get as much, PR for my film as possible. That's all going to take time, right before as I start to sell the movie. But once all that comes to an end, I would say that will probably be this summer. I've got to really be ready to dig in and try something new, whether that be another feature film or maybe some short films. I just want to keep the momentum going that I built with the pinch and keep being prolific and keep pushing stuff out into the world. And I think if we're just thinking about this, I'm thinking about this, we all get a little bit lazy at times. And I mean, the pinch was a huge amount of work. I still don't know how much money. Obviously, I haven't even started selling yet, so I don't quite know what the economics of this, what the film is going to look like in the end. And that's going to be a big factor, I would say, going and doing another feature film, trying to figure out what that is. But again, I'm sitting here trying to figure out, well, how can I sort of get myself ready for that next feature film? And again, for me, that's going to be short films. But all of us, there's got to be things we could be doing, extra things we could be doing, being just a little more productive, and raising that output, the quantity of output just a little more, because ultimately I do think that will help the quality. Hopefully, wherever you are in your screenwriting or filmmaking journey, you can take something away from this. Again, I'll link to the article. Definitely check that out and just read through it. Anyway, that's the show. Thank you for listening.